Um, I guess what I'd like to do today is talk a little bit about what I've learned in the 14 years I've been here in Silicon Valley, knowing that you're reaching out to a global startup ecosystem. I find that sometimes people don't always get what Silicon Valley is all about. So let me first start with a bit of history of me, and then I will talk about the things I've learned here and how people should think about this environment and whether or not their startup might be right for it. So I started off, basically spent my entire life as an entrepreneur. I started my first business when I was 12, ran businesses all through high school and college. And then when I graduated, went full time as an entrepreneur and ended up starting one of the first web businesses in the world in 1993, right at sort of the birth of the web. Uh, that company quickly became a portal. I've been told we invented cost per click in 1994, although, while it helped the company a lot, I didn't understand the concept of business process patents, or it would have done even better for me. I took that company public in 1999, and very shortly thereafter, the bubble burst. And there was not really the same sort of opportunity for her web businesses that there was before. So because I had never raised venture capital, which is interesting now that I'm in that business, I was able to take that company private, which was a great outcome for everybody involved. We dividended out about 3 times the public share price in a single day, and then distributed out the remainder of the money and assets in the going private transaction. So that was in New York. I moved west, got to Silicon Valley about 18 years ago. And what I noticed at the time was there was a very large gap between angel and venture. Angel was in essence a sort of community group of people that would get together every once in a while, maybe once a quarter, to hear pitches from startups. And if they liked the idea, then they'd ask them for more information and they'd take forever. And then they'd write very, very, very small checks. On the flip side, after the 90s, if you look at the 90s, venture capital firms were routinely single-digit hundreds of millions of dollars. But post the excitement the web created in technology investing, you ended up with multiple firms in the billions of dollars. And so venture firms, as they get larger, it's very hard to grow a venture firm by scaling the team. So you usually have to scale the size of your check. And this meant that there was this gap. Angel over here, very small, and venture over here, very big. And in the middle was this sort of opportunities where smart people with great ideas that didn't need a lot of capital, didn't have an easy access to that early capital to get started. So I was recruited in to build and run an equity practice at a large venture debt shop, a group called Triple Point Capital. And that became one of the probably first 3, to my knowledge, institutional seed investing practices in the country. So 2007-ish. There were not many people doing it. So I spent and this is an important part of my history as relates to the things I'm going to talk about around Silicon Valley. For 8 years, I did 2 things. I founded and invested in startups, and I got to know VCs at the top 10 to 15 venture firms, because the firm that backed me with their balance sheet was a provider of debt to venture-backed groups, and they wanted to know more of those people. So when I started that job, they asked me how many VCs I knew, and I added it up, and the number was 12. And when I left 8 years later, it was 327. So I got to know an enormous number of people that worked at the top 10 venture shops. Now, I took the approach I was a freelance writer as well for about 10 years. So I really took the approach of interviewing these people and asking them all kinds of questions, just trying to learn about what they were looking for, what made them good, and what things were they doing wrong, mistakes they'd made. And that was very formative to sort of how I learned the business. And that's why when I talk about my view of venture capital, it's not just mine, it's the view of, learning across hundreds of VCs that do this full time. So let's get into that. Like, what are Silicon Valley venture capitalists looking for? If you're a founder and you're thinking about whether venture capital is right for you, there's that old Willie Horton saying, why do you rob banks? That's where the money is. Well, people tend to go to VCs for funding because there's money there. But venture capital is not the right type of capital for most types of businesses. It is explicitly there for very specific types of businesses. Let's start with how venture capital firms work, just at a basic 101. So as an example, I've just launched a new firm, Tenacity Venture Capital. I spun out of NEA to do everything before the Series A, seed, pre-seed, formation, incubation, the whole thing. So I take my story. I'm a founder again. That's why my title is founder and general partner. I raise money for my company. My company in this case is an investment company. So I go talk to LPs, limited partners, folks that have material amounts of capital, and I tell them how I'm going to invest, what sort of companies I'm going to invest in, where I'm going to invest, so that I can make certain types of returns. Now, historically, if you look at, I sort of look at my history and I take it in 3-year chunks as the equivalent of a fund, because a fund would normally take about 3 years to deploy. My oldest fund is a little bit shy of a 14x returning fund. For every dollar it went in, $14 came out. The next fund's about 5.5x. The next fund's about 6.5x. And the youngest fund's about 2x. So, clearly they're investing in me because they believe I can do something similar, make them 5+ times their money back. And that's important because there's lots of different types of places for LPs to put their money, and each one represents a different risk-reward ratio. My downside risk is that if I'm wrong, I lose all my money. But if I'm right, I want to make 40 to 100x on my investments. And this is probably the single biggest thing I think people sometimes don't understand. They've heard the 10x. Well, yeah, I'd love to have a 10x fund. I've had one that's better than that. But I can't have 10x investments because about 40% of investments in venture go to zero, or you lose money on them. So you don't make up for those with 10x's, not at the level that people are looking for, at least in my case. Now, the later stage you get, the lower the multiples or returns people are looking for. Now, people are either looking for MOIC, multiple on invested capital, or they're looking for IRR, the internal rate of return, the equivalent of an interest rate that they're paid. I'm very focused on multiple because when you go as early as I go, as I said, I'm shooting for 40 to 100x returns on these investments if it works out. I always say I need 5 things to make an investment: people, a great idea, and a huge market if it works. Well, if you look at traditional venture, the same thing holds true. So I created what I call the Ben rule. Arrogant, I know, but I always was envious of Moore for having Moore's law. So I created the Ben rule. And this is sort of how to think about whether or not you should seek out venture capital. And the mindset is take what you believe your ultimate outcome would be. The best possible situation, the thing that makes you happy enough to say yes to, the acquisition, whatever it is, the number that when you've worked really, really hard for 7 to 10 years and someone says, I want to buy this business for X, the number you're going to say yes to. Okay. Now take that number, multiply it by 20% or divide by 5. And then if that number is not half of the size of the venture firm you're pitching, you shouldn't be pitching them. Let's just do a simple example. You think that if you work incredibly hard for 10 years, this company you're building is going to be bought for $100 million. And that's big. And you're excited about that. Okay. Well, 20% of that's $20 million. You can't pitch very big venture firms. The thing is, you have to be material to a venture firm for them to want to make an investment. And the reason I'm having you multiply by 20% is that's typically how much of your company a venture firm is going to own. A venture firm will typically own about 20% of a company if they're investing in the Series A, and if they do their pro rata to protect it thereafter. And so that 20% needs to be material to the fund. So if you're at $1 billion fund and someone has a $100 million outcome, you're going to make $20 million. And you go back to your LPs that gave you that money and you say, hey, here's $20 million. And they're like, well, there's $980 million to go. So get back to work. And the thing is, a VC has whatever level of knowledge and experience they've gained, and they have their time as a way to deploy it, right? Obviously, they're deploying capital, but the capital goes in once. The time goes in for the entire life of the company. And, therefore, they can only do a finite number of deals. A lot of people don't feel comfortable on being on more than 8 boards. I know people that are on 20, but that's an anomaly. It's a sort of superhuman that I have an enormous amount of respect for. But if 8 is the number and your fund's going to be deployed over 3 years, I'm oversimplifying here. You're probably going to do 0 to 1, 0 to 2 deals a year. And if that's the case, every single one has to have a chance of being material enough to matter to your firm. Personally, I believe, and I think many people believe, if the company does not have a chance of being a public company one day, then you can't invest in an venture. Not in tier 1 venture, not when you're shooting for the kind of returns and you're managing the kind of funds that a lot of the larger shops are. So Now, this is a common disconnect where, I often see entrepreneurs. I run a site, which is www.pitch-ben.com. Anybody can pitch me a 1-minute video of their idea, and I will promise them a 1-minute video response. Now, it's usually advice, but, like this last batch, I saw about a dozen companies yesterday, and I think I asked for 3 or 4 decks so I could learn more. And I actually just made my first investment in a pitch-ben company about 2 weeks ago. Very excited about it. So I do that because a lot of people often ask, how do I get access to Silicon Valley? And by the way, I do see that there is a chat session on the side here. So please feel free to ask me any questions. I will try to pay attention to what's in the chat. And when questions come in, I will try to answer them. It says private chat. Maybe I should switch over to comments. Oh, nope. I'm going to go back to private chat. Okay, so if you chat me, I will try to answer your questions. But, it's going back to sort of it has to be big enough. Here's the downside for you if you raise venture capital and it's not the right fit. Somebody will eventually tell you that if you're going to pitch a VC, you got to tell them it's at least $1 billion opportunity. By the way, I don't think $1 billion opportunity is big enough. I don't agree with that. Yes, if you're trying to trick them or game them or position it. But here's the problem. A venture relationship, somebody writes you a Series A term sheet. You're basically signing a one-way prenup. You're getting married. You're going to be with this person for 7 to 10 years. They're going to be on your board. Okay. And they have the right to push you out. You don't have the right to push them out. You really want to be doing deals with people that are in it for the same reason that you are. Because I have seen this on more than one occasion. Entrepreneur, I remember one guy back in the bubble bought a company that was sort of floundering, and he raised venture capital to do it. And then, let's say he bought it for $30 million. And then I can't remember the exact numbers, but later he had a chance to sell it for $120 million. Now he had $10 million in the deal. So he was super excited. He's going to make 4 times his money. He's going to make $30-40 million. This is great. And the VCs were like, no, that's not what we're in this for. And they vetoed the deal. In other cases, I remember I was talking to somebody where the entrepreneurs had worked really hard. They'd gotten an offer they were excited about, and the VC wouldn't support them. And I was like, well, what are you going to do? And he said, well, this is the challenge. Not only some, and this is rarer now than it used to be. A lot of VCs are very supportive and will sort of do what they got to do to help their entrepreneurs. But there are still some that will say, no, that's not what we're in this for. We're in this for big time. And you told us you were going big time. You told us it was $1 billion opportunity. Why would you sell $1 billion opportunity for $50 million? But here's the thing. No one should judge what's big enough to you, right? If you run a company that you can sell for $50 million and you still own half of it and get to keep 25, in a lot of places, that's life-changing money. So who's to say that's the wrong decision? It's just not the right decision for the venture firm. And so don't end up partnering with people that don't have the same goals and same possibilities in mind that you do. I mentioned pitch-ben.com as a way to sort of make sure everybody has access to me or to venture in general, because I know 327 VCs. If it's the right fit, if it's not the right fit for me, I can find the right person for it. I will tell you that most of those pitches end up getting, advice more than anything else. And I also, just for any of you that are interested in pitching me on pitch-ben.com, or for anybody pitching in general, maybe you're going to a startup competition, keep in mind that pitching is about specificity. What I often say to folks is you need to tell me who you are, what you are doing, who you are doing it for, how you're doing it, how you're doing, what they're paying you, and how many of them there are. So really get into the granular numbers and granular realities, because otherwise people can't make a decision. People see an enormous amount of deals, and they've really got to get excited, and they've got to get excited early. So always lead with your elevator pitch. Tell somebody, be prepared in any presentation you make, whether it's somebody you meet on the road that you think could be an investor or a customer, or going into a firm, like start with that elevator pitch. I'm Ben Narasin. I'm running a seed investing firm. There you go. There's my elevator pitch. I'm a XYZ company. I'm making GPS enabled collars for dogs with a cellular connection. So no matter where your dog is, you'll be able to find them. Okay. Elevator pitch, right? And sometimes people say, oh, I have a very complex business and it's very hard to explain. Einstein once said, if you can't explain something simply, you don't understand it well enough. There was a Nobel Prize winner that used to work at NEA when I was there, who explain nuclear fusion to me on a Post-it note. If somebody can explain nuclear fusion to me on a Post-it note, you can explain what you do in one concise line. And if you can't, you need to keep working until you can, because that is really critical.